Griggs is the Imam of the Community Mosque of Winston-Salem, Associate Chaplain for Muslim Life at Wake Forest University, Vice President of Islamic Circle of North America, member of Central Shura of ICNA, and Board Chairman, ICNA Council for Social Justice. He's a founding member of Muslims for Social Justice, member of Movement to End Racism and Islamophobia. Reform activist, national lecturer, freelance writer, and author of Come Let Us Change This World, a brief history of the Islamic Party in North America. He's the former editor of ICNA's Message Magazine, Community Access Television Board Chairman, producer, and host, and co-convener of Black Leadership Roundtable of Winston-Salem, Forsyth County. Without further ado, Imam Khalid Griggs.
I'm gonna stand. I'll start standing. Okay, is this ready?
Yeah,
You're gonna be all hooked up.
No, hooked up. That's right. Wired.
We don't know where it's going.
That's right. Right. So should it be green light on this? Okay. Good. Thanks. Thank you. Oh boy. Okay. Just stick this in my pocket. Okay. Mm-hmm. Wait, start. So wired up. Oh, if I'm gonna get electrocuted or what on these wires? أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم Assalamu alaikum. Brothers and sisters, we will have what I hope to be a very interactive discussion today because the time that's allotted is a very long period of time. And no one wants to hear me talk for 3 hours. So we're going to just have some interaction, some questions and answers. If something comes up during the course before one of our breaks, if you would just bring it to my attention and don't do it too often because you may throw me off a little bit. But if you have a pressing question as I'm speaking, just raise your hand and we'll deal with the question. The topic this morning, of course, is reclaiming the life and legacy of El-Hajj Malik Al-Shabazz, Shaheed Brother Malcolm X. And it's a very significant topic for us to discuss. Many of you probably know more about El-Hajj Malik Al-Shabazz than I do. And so I'm not assuming that I am even the expert in this room because there's so much information that's available about Malcolm that I want you to share with me and with others if you find that there are some gaps in information that are essential for us to discuss. Another point that I want to make at the very beginning, I made this point last night, but for those who weren't here last night, I'll make the point again, and that is that as much as I have been a Malcolm lover, and as much as I have admired his work, I personally never met Malcolm X. When Malcolm was assassinated, I was maybe 11 or 12 years old, living in North Carolina. And of course, he was in New York most of the time. And so, because of the geographic boundaries and because of the age differential, I never met him. But I've had the honor of meeting his wife and developing a relationship with his wife, with many of his daughters, and with as many individuals who have been around Malcolm X. I've tried to meet them as a journalist. I've tried to interview many of them. And so I'm coming from a perspective, like many of you, that this is someone that we really admired because of his courageous stance and because how much he meant to not just African Americans, but meant to the country and to the world. I'll share one other thing and we'll jump right into it because we have a lot of information. I had the honor of meeting. I want to emphasize again, I'm not trying to give relationship year by year many of his daughters, chronology of his life, with as many as so many things available around Malcolm X. Go to check Google, to meet check Google as a journalist, timelines, and you can read his autobiography. And so I'm coming from this basic information, many of you, that I want to highlight some of the things about his life that we can draw some lessons from now in the afternoon to not where we, inshallah, will really get into that part of the discussion. The country and what we can learn and what are we to take. What I'll share one other thing and we'll jump right into it because we have a lot of information. Had the honor of meeting his wife, and that is that how I was first introduced to knowledge and enlightenment of Malcolm X was through my beloved aunt who lives in the Bronx in New York City. And I used to spend a lot of my time during the summer in particular with my Aunt Lou. She was my favorite aunt, and I, from a young child, wanted to go hang out during the summers with my Aunt Lou. Part of it was my relationship with her. Part was just really get away from my parents, and she was giving me a little more freedom to run around in New York City, hanging out with my cousins. But my Aunt Lou had two passions. One of those passions was Malcolm X. And the other passion was for the New York Mets. And I still have a baseball team that bad right now. And the Mets were just being formed in the early 1960s. And I can recall going to New York City in the summer of 1966 when I dropped my bags in my aunt's house. She told me that you did not go hang out, run the streets, and hang out with your cousins until you read this book. That book was the autobiography of Malcolm X. I can't remember if I was in 7th or 8th grade at the time. I was a voracious reader at that time. My Aunt Lou had two passions. I said, okay, Aunt Lou, one of those passions, and I couldn't put it down. Malcolm X gripped me. There was something about it that was for me and I have to admit, from the time I read that book in the summer of 1966 until the time that I embraced Islam. And I can honestly believe that I was consciously and subconsciously trying to find this way of life toward Islam, not as it was practiced by this man, Malcolm X, because I didn't run into any Muslims. I didn't know of any Muslims in North Carolina. I knew of people in the Nation of Islam. And for the purpose of this discussion, my Aunt Lou had not learned to use the two changes. And if there are those who are here now or who come later who are members of the nation, please don't take discussion of how I present this division between the Nation of Islam and what's recognized as Sunni Islam. To say back in the day, we used to present Orthodox Islam. Don't take offense. Nation and make this distinction. Now, let me go ahead and begin. This first slide is a quote from El-Hajj Malik al-Shabazz, where he said that you can't separate peace from freedom. If you don't have peace, there can be no freedom. This is kind of an ideological underpinning that we'll find throughout the conscious thinking and the conscious days of Malcolm X. This is kind of he was one, like so many of us should be today, that we'll find, and so often we find even in various social justice struggles in the United States today, he was one who have this mantra. Most of the time, it's not justice or social. But Malcolm, given the fact that African nations are just emerging, he felt that freedom, justice, which encompasses this idea of justice, given the fact that most African nations are just emerging, a person to be satisfied, to freedom or peace, and to say that I have freedom. Given the fact that there's no freedom, there can be no peace. And so I wanted to start off with that particular slide. This is one of the pictures of El-Hajj Malik al-Shabazz. This is in his transformation as El-Hajj Malik al-Shabazz. This was not in his earlier days, but I just sort of liked the picture. So I just sort of threw this up at the beginning. Now, Malcolm was the son of Louise Little, who was shown on the slide, and his father, Earl Little. Louise Little was from Grenada. And being from Grenada, she came into the United States, and she was a part and was aware of a movement in the islands that started off in the Caribbean. And this movement was started by an individual by the name of Marcus Mosiah Garvey, who was from the island of Jamaica. And Louise Little had embraced this organization at a relatively young age. Her husband was Earl Little, and Earl Little was from Reynolds, Georgia. And so we find that their coming together represented a kind of cultural interaction between the Caribbean way of doing things and the kind of Caribbean mentality, which is not different from other human beings, but there was a different flow. If you've ever been to the Caribbean, you know that there's a different kind of flow than it is here in many parts of the States, and especially in Reynolds, Georgia at this particular time. In 1919, at a conference for the Universal Negro Improvement Association, which, as I said, was founded by Marcus Mosiah Garvey, that Earl Little and Louise met in Montreal, Canada. And Earl and Louise were very active members of this organization. And I want to just pause for a moment because maybe you are not familiar with the UNIA. Is everybody familiar? Know anything about it? If so, I just go on. Okay. So I'll pause and just talk a little bit about the UNIA. The UNIA was formed by Marcus Garvey. And part of the credentials, part of the uniqueness of this organization is that during the time when it was formed in the 19-teens, up until today, it was the largest membership organization of African people ever. This was a multi-continent and multi-geographic organization. It was an organization that many people just characterized that, oh, this is just a Back to Africa organization. It was 1,000 times more than a Back to Africa organization. It was an organization that set as part of its objective the upliftment of oppressed people, and particularly people of African descent. And so when Louise Little, living in Grenada, and when Earl Little, coming from Reynolds, Georgia, heard this message of upliftment, heard this message of we are going to organize ourselves, we are going to free our minds of all of the cultural shackles that are put on our minds. They joined this and became very active in their participation. Now remember, we're talking about the teens and the 1920s, where the largest membership organization of African people existed before or even exists to this day. Now, Marcus Garvey, as you see, who's standing on the right in this picture, was a person who was a journalist. And as a journalist, he developed a keen eye for what's going on in society. He had to be an observer. And what he observed in the Caribbean and what he observed in South America, because Garvey had gone to the country of Panama and he had gotten involved by writing about worker strikes and how American corporations were taking so much advantage of the Panamanian people. And he wrote about these things. He traveled into the United States. Garvey traveled all the way to England. And when he was in London, he associated with a man by the name of Dus Muhammad Ali, who was a Muslim from the Sudan. His mom was from the Sudan. His dad was from Egypt. And Dus had started this publication called the African Times and Orient Review. And Dus Muhammad Ali is not given the kind of credit or recognition from the history that he deserves on a number of fronts. One thing that this man, Dus Muhammad Ali, and his activities in his writing was one of the early 20th century pan-Islamic personalities. That he was one who was saying that, look, we're all Muslim. And look at our condition, whether we're living in the UK, whether we're in Egypt, whether we're in Sudan. Look at our condition as Muslims, and we'll find a common denominator that's retarding our growth and development, and that's Western imperialism. Whether it's coming in the form of the British Empire, you know, the people who were saying at one time that the sun never sets on the British Empire because they had colonized so much of the world, that anywhere you go on the planet, at any time of the day, you would still be there somewhere in some of the colonies of the British. It's not like that now, of course, but this is what they took pride in. And so Marcus Garvey, through his travels and through his work, he recognized some of these common issues that were plaguing the development of countries in South America, Central America, the Caribbean, and on the African continent itself. So when Garvey went to England, he was drawn to Dus Muhammad Ali. And Dus employed Marcus Garvey as a writer. And so Garvey's wife has written extensively, and Garvey had even said it himself. There's no evidence that he ever became a Muslim. But Garvey said himself that this man, Dus, influenced my thinking, that he was the one that helped me put this idea together, that there's something called a diaspora of African people, and that African people are all over the place, and we have commonalities, and there is so much that is the same than what's different, and what's separating us so much is this thing called imperialism, whether it's from the British or the French or whoever it may be. So Garvey comes back. He goes back to Jamaica. He comes to New York City. And Garvey extends the outreach of this Universal Negro Improvement Association. And Malcolm's father, Earl Little, and his mother, Louise Little, were very active members. As a matter of fact, in Omaha and in other areas, Louise Little was noted for her writing abilities and her organizational abilities. And so for so long, wherever she went, she was the secretary for the UNIA. We find that Malcolm's father, who was a very tall man, they say he was about 6'5", a very dark-skinned man, that his father was a very fiery orator. And I've had some questions, and it's just commonly passed off that his father was a Baptist minister. And I don't want to debate that point, but I do know that some folks in Malcolm's family have said that the father, and this is what one of his brothers has said, that their father was not really a preacher, but the Black church opened up its pulpit so much to the UNIA at that time that as a child, Malcolm just saw his father standing in pulpits preaching what he thought all the time. So he just assumed that his dad was a preacher. So you'll find this in his autobiography. You find it in other places. But at least one of the older brothers of Malcolm said, no, our dad wasn't really a preacher. He was just speaking in pulpits, and little Malcolm, when he would go with him, just thought that he was a minister because he saw him standing in pulpits so much in these churches. Okay. Let me just go back here for a minute. Okay. So when Malcolm was actually born, and you all know this is very common information, was born on May the 19th, 1925 in Omaha, Nebraska. And when Malcolm was born, his father, because of his outspokenness during this time, we're talking about 1925 and all 1920s and all this kind of time, we're talking about a time of very intense racial hatred and animus that was openly expressed. Let me share a point with you, and this has nothing to do directly with the life of Malcolm X, but I want to try to help us put some of these things in context so we can understand what people of African descent were up against during this particular time. How many of you all knew that 5 United States presidents were card-carrying members of the Ku Klux Klan? 5 of them. This is not Muslim mythology. This is not mythology for Malcolm X. 5 United States presidents were members of the Ku Klux Klan. The first of them, and you can look this stuff up, it's not a secret. Check Google and other ways to get the information will tell you. Starting with, and these are the only ones who were known to have been members of the Klan. And I'll try to get through this quickly. William McKinley. McKinley was a very racist guy, but they knew he was a member of the Klan, but it's not much known about his Ku Klux Klan history. The second one, who is known before the presidency of Barack Obama, that he was known as the most intelligent and brilliant president that the United States had produced, perhaps, arguably. And this was Woodrow Wilson. Woodrow Wilson, when we read his history, was one of the most racist individuals that you could have in the country. And he inspired the US Capitol in Washington, D.C. to also be a racist city. And he inspired the government, his cabinet, the members of the Supreme Court, the members of Congress. Woodrow Wilson inspired them in their racism by having screenings of the movie Birth of a Nation and the Klansman in the White House. That he brought the Supreme Court justices to come and look at some of this sick, racist garbage. And he brought them in the White House. You're on Supreme Court when you're making your judgments. This is the attitude that you should bring to your cases. You're in Congress. You're my cabinet member. So he promoted this racist attitude. And during his administration and others, DC, the nation's capital, was one of the most racist cities and unsafe cities in the United States. This is your second dude. The third guy was Warren G. Harding. Oh, Warren, President of the United States. Warren was so proud of his affiliation with the Ku Klux Klan that he was sworn into the Klan in the White House and put on his Klansman robe in the White House. It's like a graduation pinning or something. He was proud of this. The President of the United States getting sworn into the Klan in a Klan robe in the White House. Then we have Silent Cal. They call Calvin Coolidge Silent Cal because he didn't talk a lot. And maybe it's because he was so racist that he would have scared the other racists, as racist as he was. Calvin Coolidge instructed and allowed burning crosses, the symbol of terror of the Klan. He allowed the Klan to burn crosses on the steps of the United States Capitol. He observed Klan parades and declared for his cabinet, declared for the congressmen and senators, stop what you're doing. There's a Klan parade going down Constitution Avenue today, so stop what you're doing. Watch this Klan parade. And then we have that we know about Harry Truman, whose membership in the Klan was a kind of a short membership. They say he was only in there for 2 years. He disagreed with the members of the Supreme Court about their position about Catholics being in the government, because one of the targets of the Klan during this period were Catholics. And so he disagreed. He wanted to nominate a Catholic to a Supreme Court seat, and he got so much opposition, he just ended up resigning from the Klan. But 5 members of the Ku Klux Klan. This is the world that Malcolm was going into. These are the presidents that preceded and were in office when Malcolm came to maturity, was born and grew up and came to maturity. That this was the environment when over 5,000 known lynchings of African American men and women took place during this time. So we're not just talking about a small group of guys with wearing pointy head caps and white sheets. We're talking about this is something that was institutionalized even starting at the presidency of the United States during the time. And this is what Malcolm grew into. So when his family was in Omaha in 1924, they began to be threatened by the Klan and other racist groups because of the father and the way his espousing the philosophy of Garvey and this kind of thing. As I said, in May 19th, 1925, Malcolm was born. In 1926, the family moved because of these threats from the Klan, because of the night rides and throwing bricks and this kind of thing and shooting into the house. They moved to Milwaukee, Wisconsin in 1926. They moved from Milwaukee, Wisconsin. They were there for 3 years, and Louise and Earl continued their work with the Garvey movement. In 1929, they moved to Lansing, Michigan. And while in Lansing, Michigan in 1929, their house was set on fire. And it was a very tragic event that almost, and only Allah can protected that family from being burned up. There were 7 children in the house, and this fire ravaged through And they say that this was also something that was done by the Klan. In 1931, September the 28th, 1931, Earl Little was run over by a streetcar. He was laid across a streetcar tracks in 1931. And the back of his head had been smashed in. And they said for some blunt force trauma that had cracked his skull in the back, and there were some other injuries in his back. But he was laid across these trolley tracks, and the trolley came at this time and cut his body in two. And when Malcolm's mother, Louise, tried to collect from the insurance policy, the insurance company declared that this was a suicide, that we don't pay insurance for suicides. So the question comes now, how do you break your skull in the back like that? You break your own skull in the back. You got all of these bruises and all this kind of thing. How did you do that to yourself? And then after you've cracked your skull, and they believe that he was paralyzed from that blunt force that was hit him in the back of the head, that he was paralyzed and then laid across the track because he couldn't move and the trolley ran over him. How were you able to do all of this to yourself? And so what the Little family experienced after the death of their father, primarily because of the many of the African Americans in the city were afraid to be around them because of how the society had just said, well, these are radical people, they're causing all these problems and this kind of thing. So they were kind of very isolated. And the social services, and you can look at the Spike Lee movie and read the autobiography, and you can get all this information. But social services got involved, and they started splitting up the children. And one of the children that they took out of the homes, and Malcolm's mother ended up being put into a mental institution because of the pressure from her husband's murder, the insurance company not paying off, having these 7 mouths to feed. There were a lot of reasons why the pressure got to her. Now, let me just add this one other little point, and that is that Malcolm's uncles, on his paternal uncles, that 3 of his uncles had also died under very similar circumstances as his father. 3 of them. It was a family that was very much into speaking out against oppression. So 3 of his uncles and his father died under circumstances that many believe that it was because of their outspokenness, and the racists at the time got them and killed them. Okay, so Malcolm is his mom was put in a mental institution in 1939. The dad killed in 1931, so 8 years she was around. Malcolm bounced around from various foster homes during this time. And in February of 1941, Malcolm went to live with his sister. And it was actually in the African American community and a number of communities, this idea about a half brother or half sister wasn't there. Malcolm looked at Ella as his sister, not half sister, and, this kind of stuff. Ella was the child of his father, but not Louise. Ella had another mother. But Malcolm wanted to go live with Ella. And Ella was living in Boston, Massachusetts, and she had established herself there in Boston. She was involved in the community and everything else. Now, on the right side of that is a picture that's horribly out of place. So I can't make any rhyme or reason why this picture is right here. I have very low PowerPoint skills, putting together PowerPoints. And my wife was not with me to change this. So this is why you see a picture of Malcolm in 1964 with his daughter Ilyasha. So just know that this is not directly connected with what I'm talking about now, because I'm talking about Malcolm as a teenager, not as a grown man in 1964. But Ella was a personality in the city of Boston itself, particularly in the African American community. She was very outspoken. She was known for taking very strong positions for things that are right. Now, on the picture on the left, now both of these pictures should go together. The picture on the left is a picture of Malcolm X when he was 14 years old. Now, you can't look at this picture and tell me that the person looks like he's 14 years old in this picture. Well, I can't say it anyway. He looks much older. And this was a quality that Malcolm had at a very young age, that he looked much older than he was. And he was a tall guy, 6'3", 6'4". And he was hanging out with older people. And so we find that when Malcolm went to live with his sister, he could hang out comfortably with boys and men who were much older than him, because they looked at him and his big size and looked at his face, and they just thought that this guy's as old as we are. They could be in their 20s, but they just thought that the way he looked, he's got to be our same age. And he didn't do anything to dispel anyone's false notion about his age. So Malcolm found himself, after living with his sister Ella, that there was an attraction to him. It was something, even though when he was back in Lansing, when he was in Milwaukee, he was a really smart young man. And there's this narrative, a false narrative about Malcolm, that when he went to prison, which I'm about to talk about, that when he went to prison, that he couldn't read or write, that he was an illiterate person who taught himself how to read and write in prison. That, from what I understand, is a very false narrative. That when he was in school, and he didn't go beyond the 7th grade, but when he was in school, he was an exceptional student. As a matter of fact, he was the president of his 7th grade class, and he was the only African American in the class. And Malcolm has said, I can't remember if this is in the autobiography or somewhere else, but Malcolm has said about his experience that he was called the N-word so much that he, growing up, thought that that was his name. People just referred to him as, hey, book. And so he said that at this particular time of his life, he didn't really get angry about it, because he thought that this was some kind of pet name. And I'm sure it's part exaggeration in this, but he said he thought it was a pet name because the white kids called him this and teachers called him this so much. But the idea that Malcolm could not read and write when he went to live with his sister and when he was locked up and went to prison is a false narrative. Now, of course, if someone, after reading and being so smart, and you don't read a lot of books for a long time, then maybe your analytical skills, maybe your comprehension may go down because you're not doing something consistently, but you're not going to forget ABC and how to put ABC together and letters together to read. Okay, so Malcolm started doing odd jobs while he was with his sister Ella. And one of the jobs that he took on was riding on this New Haven Railroad, and it would go down into New York City. And Malcolm found out, and he realized at his early working days, that the more dramatic he was in whatever task he was performing, He was clowning, basically, what he was doing. That the more he clowned, the more tips, the bigger the tips got. So if he were on as a porter on the train, the more he, yes, sir, and come and tell me what you want, just tell me right now, and I'll run and get it, and making up rhymes and this kind of thing, he realized that because of going overboard the way that he would get more tips. He would make more money. When Malcolm kept going on this train into New York, he realized that, you know, I could make a little bit more money rather than shucking and jiving on the train if I just start selling marijuana by the stick. And so people who are traveling, if I can just be known as their reefer guy, anybody want marijuana, just look for the tall dude with the red hair. So Malcolm started making money on the side by selling reefer on the trains. But when he ventured into Harlem, it was something about Harlem that just pulled him in. It was something about the nightlife, the street life there, that he couldn't just divorce himself from. His sister Ella knew how smart he was. She wanted him to go on and finish school and do the education thing, but at that stage in his life, now remember, he is still a teenager, but in that stage of his life, education was not on his mind. It was how to use his street smarts to try to get over and do things that could bring him the most money with the least amount of work. So Malcolm moved to New York. And when he was in New York, he adopted this first kind of persona of Detroit Red, that he started calling himself, he started presenting himself Detroit Red. And he said, and I remember this is in the autobiography, that he started saying Detroit Red because if he said he was Lansing Red, people would laugh at him. You're in New York City. Where is Lansing? What is a Lansing? So he said, no, I'm Detroit Red. And the red was from the flaming almost color of his hair. It was very an odd color of hair that he had on his head. So here's Detroit Red. And Malcolm said that he would have called himself some other red, New York Red, but he was working in a restaurant, and one of the people in the restaurant, everybody called him New York Red, and this person that he was working with was the famous African-American comedian by the name of Red Fox. So Malcolm had to get another name to identify himself by. So Malcolm got really caught up, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this part. He got really caught up in the nightlife and the street life there in New York. He starts living in Harlem. He gets involved in a lot of underworld things in Harlem. And here's something else that I think we need to look at more objectively, because the projection about Malcolm was that, and he even suggests this in his autobiography, when he talks about, and I won't get into that because I'm jumping ahead of myself, but Malcolm lends he paves the way for us to think of that he was a seriously criminal element, that he was a gangster, that he was a big dope dealer, that he was a pimp, and he did all of these things. Now, from the perspective of Islam, what he was doing and how he was living and how he was making his money was haram. There's no question about it. But if you want to compare the lifestyle of gangsters during Malcolm's time in Harlem with what he was doing, it was very minor things that he was doing. When Malcolm started with this autobiography, I'm jumping a little bit ahead, but when he started narrating his autobiography in 1963, he was still very intimately involved with the Nation of Islam. And so the intent for this autobiography was to glorify the Nation of Islam and its leadership. And so he wanted to paint a picture of himself that said that I was so far down in the mud that nothing could get me out other than this Nation of Islam and its leader. So he kind of embellished who he was in this underground subculture in Harlem, New York at this time. Understand what I'm saying? That don't think that he was just a cold-blooded, unfeeling criminal like some of my friends turned out to be. Now, I grew up with some guys that were everything that Malcolm projected himself to be, but they say that Malcolm was not that person. People who knew him, his family, and everyone else, at whatever the different experience that he was in prior to joining the nation, this is what they say about it. Okay, so Malcolm's living in Harlem in 19, and I'm jumping around here a little bit. Malcolm ends up going back to Boston. And when he's in Boston, in about 1945, while he's in Boston, he organizes a little yeah, you know what I'm trying to say. He organizes a ring of people going around committing B&Es, breaking and entering, second story man, climbing up people's second story, up on the roof, going in their houses, while people were in the houses, while people were not in the houses. He ends up getting caught. Now, part of his gang, he had 2 white females in his little criminal enterprise. And they would steal these things and take them to the pawn shop and sell it on the street in Boston. And he had 2 white females in his little criminal enterprise. And there were about 2 or 3 other guys, African-American men, in this enterprise. So when Malcolm got caught and went before the judge, he had never been arrested. He had never, of course, done any kind of prison time or jail time. And again, this helps when you know his real story, that this was not the thugged out, unredeemable person that some folks try to project him as being before he went to prison and had the conversion experience that he had. So when he goes in front of the judge, Malcolm said that what would normally get someone a maximum of 2 years, that he got 8 years. And he said that the 8 years he felt was not because of the crime that they were convicted of, but it was because of their being with these white females, to have the audacity in 1945 to have these white females going around stealing stuff for you, and you the head of this little criminal group. I'm gonna throw the book at you, give you the maximum amount of time that I can possibly do. And so he ended up getting a 10-year sentence. He ended up doing 8 years of this sentence. Now, when Malcolm was locked up and sent to prison in Massachusetts, and the Spike Lee movie, from what I understand, shows how he was with very little exaggeration. When he went into prison, he had such a, I hate everything around me. I hate white folks because of, look at what happened to me. I got all of this time for simply being with white females. He had this attitude to the degree that people start calling him by another name, not Detroit Red, but they start calling him Satan. That this guy must be the devil. And they were saying he was the devil because of the way he would curse out the chaplains. The chaplain would come around and try to talk to him, and he'd like just cut into him. Street kind of cursing out. And so little did he know that his brother Filbert and his youngest brother Reginald had joined an organization that had been formed in 1930. And it was organized by a person that has many called a lot of different names, W.D. Fard, Wallace Fard, Muhammad, and for Elijah Muhammad, he called him Allah. W.D. Fard was a salesman. He was going door to door. He was a street salesman who was going door to door selling boots and umbrellas and cloth and this kind of thing. And he had targeted for his clientele people in the inner city in Detroit. And while he was in Chicago. And in Chicago, as he was going around to these different places, talking to the people, he would tell the people about the glory of your race, that you see this robe that I have, that this is what your ancestors used to wear, that your history didn't start in slavery. And he was saying things that was very appealing to the people. So eventually he ended up renting a hall, a little apartment starting off. And people would come to listen to him to talk and this kind of thing. This man by the name of Robert Poole, who changed his name to Elijah Muhammad from Sandersville, Georgia, was a person who was like so many people coming from the deep South during this period who had migrated to either the largest cities on the East Coast or the largest cities on the West Coast for jobs and trying to escape racist terrorism in the cities and states that they were from, that Robert Poole's wife, Clara, was started to go to these meetings of W.D. Fard. Robert Poole, and I'm saying this, and it's just a statement of fact, had an alcohol problem at that time. He was a heavy drinker, and his wife was trying to find a way to help her husband, who was the father of all of these children, to stop drinking. So she convinced her husband to come with her to some of these meetings, and as Elijah sat there listening, he started to believe that this man who was coming with all of these inspiring words was more than just a man. And so from 1930 to 1934, W.D. Fard was the leader, the founder of this group, the Lost Foundation of Islam in the Wilderness in North America. And in 1934, he just kind of disappeared off the scene. There's a lot of speculation what this disappearance was all about. Some, he was running from the FBI. It's a lot of different things that are said why he disappeared. But Elijah Muhammad, who had totally embraced Fard at this time, came forward in 1934 within the organization and said, you know that man, W.D. Fard, that was teaching us? And we said, yeah. He said, well, he is Allah who's appeared in the form of a man, and he has made me his prophet. That Fard is Allah, and now Elijah has elevated himself from being just a lieutenant of Fard to the prophet of Allah. Now that didn't set too well with everybody who was in this group, because some of them tried to kill him, literally. And he had to leave town, and he hid out in places like Washington, D.C. on the East Coast, Philadelphia on the East Coast. He changed his name, something Kareem, Elijah Mukmuk. There's about 4 or 5 different names that he used, trying to throw off members of the Nation of Islam who was not going to accept the idea that he was the messenger of Allah and that Fard was Allah who appeared in the form of a man to teach black people their true religion. Many of them weren't going for it. So when things kind of settled down, he moved back to Chicago. It was still a little hot, so he ends up moving to Detroit, Michigan. So now Malcolm is in prison in Massachusetts. And while he's in prison, his older brother Filbert, his youngest brother Reginald, embrace these teachings of the Nation of Islam. And as the years were going by, more and more of Malcolm's family started to embrace the teachings. They contacted Ella in Massachusetts and tried to convince Ella that this is the best methodology for Black people in this country. They said that Ella was receptive to up to the degree of saying, well, that sounds good, but I ain't with that. I'm not ready to make that kind of commitment. So Malcolm's brothers came to the prison, and where Malcolm was incarcerated in Massachusetts, and began to tell him that they could show him how to get out of prison. And if you follow the teachings of this man, talking about Elijah Muhammad, you'll get out of prison. So they told Malcolm, don't eat pork, don't quit going to the Christian services, don't let anybody think you're a Christian. If you just follow the teachings of Elijah Muhammad, you will get out of prison. You won't have to do all of the time that you've been sentenced to. So Malcolm, to capsulize this story, Malcolm's ended up embracing the teachings of Elijah Muhammad and the Nation of Islam. And just as his brothers had told him that they were not, the prison authorities where he was, were not pleased with the change in Malcolm. So after petitioning from his family, he ends up getting sent to this Norfolk prison colony, this other prison in Massachusetts, where they had a tremendous library and he could read almost on any subject that he wanted to read on. So he rekindled the flame and the thirst for knowledge and information that he had had as a young child, that when he, after joining the nation, then he started reading. And some of the so-called facts that were being put out by the Nation of Islam, he began to research these facts. So in 1952, Malcolm was released from prison, and he went to live with his brother in Michigan, with Philbert in Michigan. And he got a job as a furniture salesman. And Malcolm was, because he had the kind of speaking ability that he had, that he was the top furniture salesman in this particular store. I mean, they loved this dude because everybody come in just like he had done on the train, and just like he was selling marijuana, he would talk people into purchases. So he was selling all kinds of furniture. They wanted him to stay there. But Elijah Muhammad, after meeting Malcolm in person and seeing his sharp mind and realizing the potential that he had, he said, no, I think you need to quit that job, and I'll make you the deputy minister in this temple here or there in Michigan. And so Malcolm did this. And in a short period of time, every assignment that Elijah Muhammad gave to Malcolm, he excelled in. They said, wow, you've been here for a few months and the membership has tripled. So why don't you go to Boston? So he was sent to Boston, and he was there in Boston for a while, and the same phenomena, that the membership had tripled. Here's one point to understand, that until Malcolm got out of prison and started moving around under the instruction of Elijah Muhammad, that the Nation of Islam from 1930 until 1952 was primarily a regional organization, not exclusively, but it was primarily a regional organization in the Midwest. And there's some figures that say that there were no more than 400 people nationwide in the Nation of Islam until Malcolm got out of prison in 1952, and then the organization exploded. It exploded because, and Allah knows best, but many folks believe that it exploded in the way that it did because Malcolm was appealing to a different kind of audience. That Elijah Muhammad, for all of his ability to get people to commit to the organization and to do his bidding, he was not a good speaker. He had a very monotone way of speaking. And the Nation of Islam before Malcolm was an organization that primarily attracted people who had the same level of educational achievement as Elijah, meaning people who were coming from the South and they could hardly read or write. And so when Malcolm comes out of prison in 1952, now here comes a guy who, everybody knows the story, how he read and wrote out the dictionary from A to Z. He's reading everything he can put his hands on. He has this gift to take very complex principles and concepts and history and break it down so the most common person on the street with the lowest educational attainment could understand it. And then he could turn right around and debate and discuss topics with people who had the highest levels of academic achievement. And so the organization just exploded in membership. And so Malcolm begins, he organizes, well, even before that, and this is a little known tidbit, and that is that in 1957, after 5 years of crisscrossing and running all over the country and carrying on a pace that folks like myself never could have been able to keep up with this kind of pace, but keeping up this pace for 5 years, Malcolm was hospitalized in New York, suspected of having had a heart attack. Now, this was not put out there, and most folks believe that the Nation of Islam deliberately, and Malcolm in particular, kept this information, the lid on this, because the nation ideology was supposed to make you invincible because of part of what they were saying was that Black people are gods. And so God ain't supposed to be having a heart attack, so it doesn't fit the rhetoric. So they kept the lid on this thing. So in 1957, when he was hospitalized and people started whispering, people in the hospital, Malcolm had a heart attack and this kind of thing, the lid was shut even tighter. But it just shows that he was just a dude. He was just a man that Allah gave some tremendous gifts. In 1958, Malcolm married Sister Betty, Betty Sanders. And Sister Betty was a nurse before marrying Malcolm. And Sister Betty was a very intelligent and smart person herself. And for those who were here last night, just bear with me. I had the great fortune of meeting Sister Betty, I think for the first time in 1995 or either 1996. And I met her in New York at the time. And Sister Betty is, just she was a tremendous figure herself. And it's really amazing when you have power couples. You read about power couples in hip hop and all this kind of stuff, but they define truly what a power couple was really all about. She was a very intelligent sister, very analytical, and she was very protective of her family. Now, so in 1958, he marries Betty. About 9 months to the day, the first daughter, Atala, was born, and children were coming in halfway rapid procession. In 1959, Elijah Muhammad, and I failed to mention that at this point, Elijah had appointed Malcolm as his national spokesperson and as the spokesperson for the Nation of Islam. And in 1959, Malcolm was sent by Elijah Muhammad to go to Mecca and to lay the groundwork for him, for Elijah Muhammad to perform the Hajj. This is in 1959. Now understand that the Nation of Islam at this particular time is saying that Allah appeared in the form of a man named W.D. Fard. They're saying that Elijah Muhammad is a prophet for the black man, a prophet, a messenger after the Prophet Muhammad ibn Abdullah, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And so they are saying that there's no such thing as a day of judgment, that you live, you die, and that's it. There's no accountability, there's no afterlife. And this is what is being said in 1959. When Malcolm made this trip to Jeddah, and he was trying to make arrangements for Elijah, Malcolm said that he ran into roadblocks. And he is in Mecca, he's in Jeddah, trying to get visas and all this stuff. And he said he realized that I don't even know how to pray, that I'm calling myself the national spokesman for a Muslim organization in the United States, and I don't even know how to pray. I don't know the most basic thing about Islam. And so that visit in 1959, it wasn't just when Malcolm made the Hajj that he began to start questioning the teachings of Elijah Muhammad and the Nation of Islam. It was at least as early as 1959 when he went into the Middle East himself, when he traveled to Iran, when he traveled to Syria, when he traveled, I think, Lebanon. He went to about 5 countries in 1959. Malcolm, as folks would know that many people, even to this day, Muslims are very happy to see Muslims from America. Some of it is, they got this thing with America, this, love affair with America, and you got the big blue passport, then that's your ticket to paradise when you go some places. But other parts of this was the whole idea that we didn't really even know that there were Muslims in America. And Malcolm was a sharp guy. So even though he's representing Elijah, Malcolm said that had I wanted to make Umrah myself, they were going to allow me to do this in 1959. But Malcolm, being the loyalist that he was to Elijah Muhammad, he said, no, I can't do this. My role here is to pave the way, to make the arrangements for, I'm sure he didn't say messenger of Allah over there back during that time. They would have cut his head off or something for real. But he said, I'm not going to go into Mecca before Elijah Muhammad. So after these other trips, Malcolm came back to the United States. He went to Syria, he went to Ghana, and he got into Mecca on this particular trip. Now, also in 1959, there was a media event that put the Nation of Islam on the radar of people, law enforcement, and on the radar of the general public in America when there was this documentary that aired. The reporter Mike Wallace produced this documentary called The Hate That Produced Hate. And it aired on TV stations in New York, and then it later aired across the nation. And this documentary was something that really elevated the visibility of the Nation of Islam. By this particular time, Malcolm is the national spokesperson for Elijah. And so all of these kind of public appearances and talking to the media and making statements, that was Malcolm's domain. Even if there was something that was going on in some other city, they would send Malcolm to give the to be the face of the Nation of Islam during this time. Let me just share a little story here too. I had met over the years a number of brothers who had been members of the Nation of Islam over the years. And one of them was a brother that lived in Raleigh, North Carolina by the name of Kenneth Muhammad. Now, Kenneth Muhammad at one time was the minister for the nation, I believe it was in Pittsburgh. But Kenneth Muhammad, before he came back to North Carolina, and he was a minister of the nation there in North Carolina, in Raleigh. But Kenneth Muhammad was one of those people who traveled with Malcolm, as Malcolm was going all around the country, setting up these temples and increasing the membership and these kinds of things. And one of the things that Kenneth Muhammad said was that I have never before or since been around someone who had as much energy as this man, that he would go like days sometime and not even eat, that he would go from morning to night and just roll over from one event to the next, jump in his car, go to another city. And he did this every single day, crisscrossing the country, oftentimes driving in a car. And Kenneth told me, alhamdulillah, he ended up accepting the sunnah before he died, and Allah reward him for the good that he did. That Kenneth told me that Malcolm was a person that if you were late for 1 minute, he would have an attitude with you almost the entire day, because he was so obsessed about being on time. And he had said that when he got out of prison, he got 3 things. He got a suitcase, because he sort of felt he'd be traveling. He got a watch, and I've forgotten the 3rd thing. That's getting old. It'll come back to me. But he got a suitcase and a watch and another thing. I can't remember what it was. And they said that they could ask a pen. Yes, yeah, it's something like that. Thank you. And he said that he had these things, and Kenneth said that this is what he lived by. He lived out of the suitcase. He lived by his watch. If an event was going to start at a certain time, and Malcolm was a part of it, that you could you wouldn't have to look up at the watch, at the clock, because he's going to be on time. It's going to start on time, unlike what we do oftentimes. I mean, we're a mess with time, and don't talk about going to weddings. I've conducted some weddings, and when I first started doing it, and especially if folks were from India or Pakistan or something, and I was like, man, this is 2 hours, man. You think they've had an accident or has something terrible happened? But we haven't gotten that gene yet, in terms of honoring time and the way that we should honor time. But Kenneth Muhammad said that this is what Malcolm was all about, that you could set your watch by his actions. You knew where he was going to be, when he was going to be there, and this kind of thing. Anybody need to take a break? They want to take a break? Keep going for a little bit more. Take a break. Take a break. Okay, we'll take a break. Inshallah. Yeah, let's take a 5-minute break. 5-minute break. Now I have to stand up here wired because I got too many wires to take off. I'll just sit down. Yeah, I'll just sit down. Yeah. Okay, Zia? It's okay? Okay. Wa alaikum salam. Look back there, saw you, man. How you doing, man? Okay, inshallah, we are about to start again. Okay, let's see. Do you have the hand mic? Is the hand mic available? We have a comment. Thank you. Okay, we're going to start off with a comment. And if you have any questions or comments, you can raise them now before we move forward. Yes. Wa alaikum salam.
Thank you for the program.
Alhamdulillah.
I was just thinking, Quran Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that those who die in the path of God don't think they are dead,
Right.
they are alive.
Right.
Subhanallah, today they are speaking about things about Malcolm X after so many years. My whole family is, admirer of Malcolm X, where his autobiography.
Mhm.
In 1970, when my husband was part of ICNA, Student Association,
Mhm.
Islamic Society of North America,
Right.
he got a letter from Elijah Muhammad, about the letter I still have somewhere the letter.
Right.
It said, Elijah Muhammad, messenger of Allah.
Right. Right. Right.
So,
Right.
subhanallah, how many people remember Elijah Muhammad than Malcolm X?
Right.
To give an example, my son, Sajid Khan, he is a police defender. He went into law just to, he writes in law. In his law, he said, I wanted to be a lawyer, attorney for Malcolm X. He wanted to go to law school.
Right. Right. Oh, that's
He was
good.
in school at 7th grade. His teacher told him he cannot be a
Right. Be a carpenter.
yeah, he cannot be a attorney.
Right.
So my son Sajid said, I'm going to be a lawyer for Malcolm X,
Mm.
to go and
That's great.
to prove him. So he's a
Alhamdulillah.
public defender now,
Alhamdulillah.
and defending minorities.
Alhamdulillah. That's good.
So I'm so proud to be, part of Malcolm X
That's right.
generation, and I thank you for,
Alhamdulillah.
saving life on his life from beginning. A lot of us don't know the history.
Right.
Even though we read that about
Right.
still,
Right.
it's really
Alhamdulillah. Very good. Thank you so much for sharing that. Alhamdulillah. Any other questions or comments? Have a Ziad. Ziad. The brother back in red shirt. Thank you. Right. Back here. Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullah. Uh-oh.
The question I have is, like I told you last night,
Uh-huh.
my background is lived last night. My side, in Liberia and the kids from other locations from the south where
Right.
actually my mom is the people from Arkansas.
Mm.
That's where a lot of their people.
Right.
That's from Mali, grandfather from the south as well. In the three
Yeah. Alhamdulillah. Right. Right.
What we knew is that his sister Ella was the first one to become Muslim.
Right.
And then before Michael. And in fact, she sent Michael. So this is what we knew.
Now, don't get ahead of me. We haven't gotten there quite yet. Don't get ahead of me. You can talk about anything back. Don't go forward on me yet. Okay. Yeah, we're going to talk about that. I was never a part of the nation. Yeah, never part of the nation. I came into Islam through an organization in DC called the Islamic Party in North America. And so I've never had that nation experience. And what I found oftentimes is I've gone different places, and I even asked here asked one of the brothers, was anybody here formerly a member of the nation? And if they were a member of the nation under Elijah Muhammad, oftentimes they take, some folks take some of the things that I say in a very offensive way. They think that I'm offending or talking down, and that's not the case at all. I'm not trying to disrespect anybody, but a fact is a fact. And Elijah was not a prophet. W.D. Fard was not a law. There is an Akira, so a fact is a fact. Yes. I'll stop you. Okay. We'll stop. Yeah. It is. It is under the leadership of Louis Farrakhan. And we're going to get into that, but we're just still a few years off from that. But we're going to get into that. Any other questions? Yes. Wa alaikum salam tila. Alhamdulillah.
I didn't want to come.
Uh-oh.
I mean, I'm here every Friday every week.
Right.
And the only reason why I do that is because it gives you more blessings.
That's right.
Allah knows I need more blessings.
Yeah.
You take me, I'm from Milwaukee.
Okay. Oh, really?
Alhamdulillah.
Alhamdulillah.
I went to Temple number 2.
Did you?
Me and my 5 brothers, the 10, 6, and wife, everything. I heard the honorable Elijah Muhammad, as they call it.
Right.
And so you're telling my story.
Right.
And it's taking me, I'm going on this journey with you, and it's like, I want the people to understand that there's a lot of Malcolms still existing today.
Yep.
One of them, I'm one of them, he's one of them.
Right.
Many Malcolms, if you went through that black experience, and
right.
Even if you didn't go through the nation, which I didn't go through, and you become a Muslim, you still come from the product or byproduct of Malcolm X.
Right. Right.
Alhamdulillah, my thing is, if you don't have a title, and you have this energy and this burning desire, and I know what Malcolm just said, burning desire, and give for damn, I got it.
Right.
But I can't get the platform to help the kids that need it the most.
Right.
So I need to talk to you afterwards about that.
Yep.
It's a jihad for me.
Yeah.
Because I know Muhammad Rasulullah is the way.
It is.
It's the way to win.
It is.
And the people who are coming here from these other countries in search of the dunya is not really going to benefit from Allah because they're integrated with American culture.
Mm-hmm.
And it hurts me because they're my brothers who have helped by showing me real.
Right.
So I need to figure out a way.
Sure, we'll talk. We're talking, inshallah. And one of the things too, and when we get into the second part of this, one of the points that we're going to make is how Malcolm was able to transform himself, that he didn't stop at a certain point. And so many, as you made reference to some of our brothers and sisters who may have come from other countries, and it's a natural phenomena for any immigrant community to do the things that many of our brothers and sisters have done, to come to the United States to try to improve the quality of their lives, to give their children better opportunities and this kind of thing. And you sort of huddle together as an immigrant community and this kind of thing. But then eventually you have to come out of this cocoon. And so I'm hoping that discussions like we're having today, and we'll really get into some stuff in the afternoon, inshallah. But discussions like we're having today will help all of us move a little further down this road. I want to share something really quick here, and we'll get started again. And I mentioned it last night, but I never tire of telling this, paraphrasing this particular hadith. And that's the hadith where the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ has said that Allah will announce in the heavens that I love this person. And he'll call that person by name. And then all of the angels will go throughout the heavens and announce that Allah loves that brother, Allah loves that sister, and you love them too. And so all of them will have this love because Allah has commanded, because he loves that person, you love him too. And then Allah will have that come down and placed in the heart of people here on earth that Allah loves this person. And so your son, Sajid, who's the lawyer, he loved Malcolm. Never seen him, never heard him, any of this stuff, but he loved Malcolm. Why? Only because Allah put that in his heart. I loved Malcolm living in North Carolina after my aunt exposed me to the autobiography. Why? Because Allah put the love of him in my heart. And so it's something, it's a kind of divine interaction. It's stuff that goes on that we can't quantify. We can't say why this is happening. But he is one of those people that in my heart, I believe that that command had to go up in the heavens first. I love this man. And then it comes down and it's in our hearts. And this is why there's so many people who had all kinds of credentials and degrees and all this other kind of stuff. And then you have Malcolm with a formal education of 7 years. And he just blows away all these folks in the eyes and estimation of so many people, because I believe Allah puts the love of him in folks' heart. Yes. Oh, wow. Alhamdulillah. Yeah. But after a while, you're no longer immigrants. And are you familiar with Altaf Hussein? Okay, Altaf used to tell this story, and I haven't heard him say it lately, but he used to tell a story with his parents being from India, that his grandfather used to have a packed suitcase at the front door that he kept at the front door. And he said, when Altaf said when he got a certain age, he asked his granddaddy, well, why do you have this packed suitcase? And his grandfather told him, because I don't want any of you all to forget that we're going back to India, that this is just a temporary stay. And that temporary stay just turned into 50 years, 60 years, and this kind of thing. And so at a certain point, you got to unpack the suitcase physically and even emotionally and mentally. It doesn't mean you just cast off your land of origin, but it means that that this is home. And I have to invest myself in whatever I need to do to make this a better place for myself and my children, my grandchildren, and this kind of thing. So if you're still sitting at your house with an imaginary suitcase at the front door, thinking you're going back home, unpack it. You ain't going nowhere. You're going to be right here with us. So let's try to figure out a way we can work together and make this a better spot for everybody. Yes, sister, last one. Right.
High school years, having prejudice and racism said to us about the name Malcolm X used to just embody a fear.
Right.
Because that's what the teachers were telling us. That's what we would have assemblies on. Somehow, Martin Luther King, which was he was an awesome individual.
Right.
But one portrayed hope and justice and equality, and the other one just they would just feed us all the propaganda. And
right.
Until many years later, that we learned the truth about Malcolm X.
That's right.
Bring him this, honor and the honor that
Alhamdulillah. Thank you. I appreciate you sharing that. I'm gonna say one thing and then I'll go forward. I had a good friend, and Allah has taken his soul. Seems like every time I mention somebody, they're no longer with us now. But I had a very good friend who was quite a few years older than me. And in the 1950s, he actually moved from Winston-Salem to New York City. And, he characterized himself, I'm just an old country boy from North Carolina and this kind of thing. And he said that he was in his uncle's house or one of his relatives' house, and Malcolm was on the television, in the 1950s in New York. And he said that the way that Malcolm was talking was so frightening to him on the television that he started looking over his shoulder, looking at the door to see if somebody was going to come in and kick in the door and get him just for listening to somebody that was calling out oppression in the way that he was calling it out. He said it scared him to death. And so he was somebody who ended up joining Malcolm's movement after the nation and everything else. But it was a very scary narrative, and even scared a lot of Black folks at this time, because we were not accustomed to hearing someone in that environment speak the way, at that particular time, speak the way that they were speaking. Something wrong here. I can't seem to get the screen. What's going on? What is it? Huh? It'll come back. Okay. All right. Okay. So, inshallah, we will pick up. We were talking about Mike Wallace, the hate that produced hate, that put the Nation of Islam on the national map. During this particular time, Malcolm was constantly on the debate circuit. And it wasn't like college debates where you have debate teams, but people who were representative of the kind of philosophy that the sister was saying that was more palatable, that people could more accept the way that they characterized what was going on as far as race relations and socioeconomic justice or injustice, that there was a more accepting way of dealing with some folk. And then Malcolm and the Nation of Islam was on the other end of the spectrum. It was like a polar opposite to some of these views. Because at this particular time in the nation, even though Elijah Muhammad would not had as an organizational discipline not to engage directly with the civil rights movement as it manifests itself in the north of the United States or in the south, and had actually told, and this is something that came out through documents from the FBI, and this what had come out was that they were monitoring the telephone calls and the letters from Elijah Muhammad to Malcolm, who was the minister at this time of Temple number 7 or Mosque number 7 in Harlem, New York. And through monitoring the communication, they said that what they got in one of these communications was that Elijah Muhammad was telling Malcolm very clearly, don't get involved. And we can't compete with the phone calls here. Don't get involved with any civil rights actions, any civil rights groups or civil rights actions. You stay out of these kinds of things. And this was something that was going against his personal grain, because he had come from a family that was directly involved and engaged with what was going on and trying to correct the wrongs wherever they saw them and speak out against them. And so now he was being told, and we're talking about into the 1960s, starting in 1960, 61, he's being told, stay away from certain kinds of efforts, stay away from this and away from that. And it was really wearing on him. So in his debates, he would debate someone like a number of times that was put up against him, a person by the name of Bayard Rustin. Rustin was one of the ideologues. He was one of the people who was close to Dr. Martin Luther King. And Rustin was known as a really smart strategist, that he could come up with a lot of strategies and a lot of things that were used as tactics in the nonviolent civil disobedience, civil rights part of the movement, that Bayard Rustin was the person who's credited with coming up with a lot of these ideas and these tactics. And Bayard was frequently pitted against Malcolm to talk about thank you so much. See how simple that was for a young man like this? We couldn't figure out, that's good. Yeah, we couldn't figure it out. He just hit a couple of buttons and there we go. That's good. Still not connecting those. See, you unplugged it. How are we gonna get a picture? You unplug it, see? There we go. There we go. Alhamdulillah. Thank you so much. That's right. Give this young man a hand. Thank you. Alhamdulillah. Yeah. Okay. Okay. So this is just a slide when, as Malcolm was the minister of number 7, Temple number 7 in New York, and just a slide of his presenting. This is in the Shabazz restaurant in Harlem. This was more than just a restaurant. It was kind of a meeting place. It was a gathering place for members of the Nation of Islam, and other people would come into the restaurant as well. This is just a picture of Malcolm with Elijah Muhammad's portrait, who was on the wall. In 1963, this is jumping just a little bit, but in 1960, well, before we do this, in 1962, in Los Angeles, a very pivotal event happened right in Los Angeles, California, that really tore Malcolm apart in terms of what he wanted to do and what he thought the Nation of Islam, how the nation should respond, and what he was ordered to do. In April the 27th, in 1962, a Nation of Islam member by the name of Ronald Stokes was killed by a police raid that came into the temple in Los Angeles, shot and killed Ronald Stokes, and severely wounded 6 other members of the Nation of Islam. And if any of you guys know anything about the off-limits nature of Nation of Islam spots, especially during the time of Elijah Muhammad, that was an absolute no-no. That police didn't run up in, for the most part, did not run up in nation temples and start shooting or beating or running after people or anything else. So this was a major violation for the police to come into the facility and shoot and kill Ronald Stokes and then wound severely 6 other people in there. So when Malcolm found out about it, he was outraged. I mean, they said that it's like about to blow a head gasket. He was so angry when he heard this. And he got in contact with Elijah Muhammad, and Elijah got in contact with him, and he was sent out here to Los Angeles from New York to handle this. You deal with the media, you be the person who does the eulogy or whatever was going to be done, that you will be the person in charge of the funeral. So Malcolm came out here on the 28th, 1962, and he did do as Elijah had told him to do. But then Malcolm started appealing and advocating and going very strongly with Elijah Muhammad, saying that we need to retaliate, that we're going to lose all faith in the community if we allow this to happen and we don't take any kind of position. And so Elijah, according to all what's written and all reports from people who were around at that time, they say that Elijah told Malcolm, just be patient, that God will take care of it, that we are God's people and God will handle this. So this was something that was just eating Malcolm alive. Now remember, he went into the Middle East representing Elijah in 1959, and he had direct exposure to Muslims and how Muslims interacted and how Muslims prayed and everything else. And so he still had this tugging with him. And now the nation that was professing such a strong position about don't mess with us and, and these kinds of positions, now somebody comes into your facility and kills people and wounds people, and you say, God will take care of it. God will protect us. We're God's people. And this didn't sit right with Malcolm. During that same year, in the last month of December of 1962, Allah knows best, but it seems that this was a seminal point in the history of Malcolm and the nation with the other two events, Ronald Stokes and the trip to the Middle East and Mecca and Jeddah in particular. But in December of 1962, rumors start to circulate from the Nation of Islam that Elijah Muhammad was not the morally pure person that he was encouraging everyone in the organization to be. And as a matter of fact, that rumors were starting to circulate in December of 1962 that Elijah Muhammad had fathered children by young members of the organization who were secretaries in the Nation of Islam. And so this is something else that Malcolm, and keep in mind, there was never a time when before Malcolm's martyrdom that he said that I didn't believe what I was saying and preaching and teaching to other people when he was the spokesperson for the Nation of Islam. He believed, he said, with his heart that Elijah was a messenger. He believed in the teachings of Elijah Muhammad. And so when these kinds of rumors start to circulate, it really hit him hard. And he was ready to chop people's heads off for daring to say anything like that about Elijah Muhammad. In maybe perhaps January of the next year, now all of this is going on. This is when Alex Haley started collaborating with Malcolm X to come up with this piece of literature known as the autobiography of Malcolm X. This photo here is a protest, it's another protest against police brutality in 1963. And Malcolm was very expressive. I mean, he would get very angry. And part of the anger came from his inability to say what he wanted to say in public or to organize brothers to do what he thought that needed to be done in retaliation against folks who were brutalizing just regular citizens and brutalizing members of the Nation of Islam. So early in January, Malcolm started this collaboration with Alex Haley. Alex Haley was not on the political spectrum as being a progressive or a liberal, neither one. Alex Haley was a very conservative African American. At that time, Alex Haley was a Republican, and Alex Haley was reported to have supported Barry Goldwater for president. And if you don't know about Barry, check Google can tell you something a little bit about Barry. But Alex was not of the same mindset or the thinking of Malcolm X or the Nation of Islam. He was on one spectrum, and Malcolm and the Nation were on a totally different spectrum. And so as he wrote this, the book is recognized as it's named The Autobiography of Malcolm X as told to Alex Haley. And so Malcolm would check, he would write, he would interview, he would talk, and he would bring manuscript back, and Malcolm would review it and make changes, and they would go back and forth. But upon Malcolm's martyrdom, Malcolm did not get a chance, an opportunity to review the final work. And what has come out is that there were 3 chapters that were not included in the autobiography of Malcolm X that outlined his political plan and political vision for the United States, and in particular of his organization that we'll talk about in a minute that he formed after leaving the Nation of Islam. 3 very, very important chapters that leave out the post-Nation of Islam political philosophy and vision for Malcolm personally and what he saw for the organization. It was just left completely out of the autobiography. Now, what are we doing here now? I got the little spinning thing here. Okay. No, they have not yet. They were actually bought by a Detroit, Michigan attorney. And his name slips me right now. It's Gregory something. I can't remember his last name. And he bought those chapters. And see what happened. What's going on? Yeah, and he's been holding on to these chapters. Now, the latest thing I need to check with someone at the Schomburg Library, a sister there by the name of Aisha Adawiya. She's kind of an archivist there, where a number of the works of Malcolm are. And I see have those things been finally released, at least put there, so researchers can come and read them. When Manning Marable wrote his biography of Malcolm X, A Life of Reinvention, he actually went to this attorney's house and read, and he said the attorney just allowed him to it's almost like, look, you got 15 seconds, whoop, and he turned to another page, read it quick, whoop, and he closed up. He wouldn't let him hold the documents, wouldn't let him photocopy, take a picture of it. So he's just really holding on. I have to look it up. I got it somewhere in my notes. It's Gregory something. I just can't remember his name. Maybe just Google in missing chapters of Malcolm's autobiography. I'm not sure it's in Google. No, it's after the Nation of Islam. No, it's not for the nation. Yeah. Yes. I'm sorry. Yes. Other questions? They from what I've read about him, he's sort of conservative himself, and I would dare say that if he has not released it right now, he's just trying to get the highest of money he can possibly get. When the price is right, I'm sure it's gone, because it had no value to him, historical value. It's just something. And see, it's really, thank you so much. And it's really unfortunate how it came about. One of Malcolm's daughters had taken a number of these documents. They had them in storage, and the storage company was about to sell the contents of the storage if money wasn't brought to catch up with how much money was owed on this thing. And so this guy comes in and puts up all of this money, and through this money, he didn't get everything, but he got a portion of it. And I'm gonna jump ahead of myself too. One of the really, perhaps the most tragic things about documenting the legacy of Malcolm was that his wife, Sister Betty, threw away, they said, like 1 or 2 50-gallon drums of his personal diaries and journals and all of this kind of thing after he was martyred. And so, I mean, so much of his thoughts and ideas, and as he's traveling, he's writing this down, and all these things are gone. I mean, just lost. And so, and then unfortunately, one of his daughters, and I won't say which one, but I do know, one of his daughters got those possessions, put it in storage, and then couldn't get it out of storage. And the Schomburg, how the Schomburg intervenes, they find out about this when it finally gets out, right when they're getting ready to auction the thing, and they got lawyers and come in and they stop the auction and were able to do some stuff. And then this lawyer, his name almost came to me, Gregory Reed. Thank you so much. Was it Sheikh Google? Sheikh Google. Okay, alhamdulillah. It's got a lot of good stuff on there now. Yeah, Gregory Reed was the attorney that ended up with these missing chapters. Okay, so these rumors are spreading, and Malcolm is getting more and more conflicted about what's going on. The autobiography begins, Malcolm in this year also in 63 begins to complain about FBI surveillance. One really interesting thing, and maybe jumping a little ahead of myself, but I'll just jump just a little bit, that right after Malcolm left the Nation of Islam, immediately after he left the Nation of Islam, FBI agents came to his house, and they had called him to make arrangements to come. So he knew that they were coming. So he took a recorder and stuck it under the couch where he was sitting. So he was going to, what do you call it? He was going to surveil the surveillors. He was going to record the recorders. So he had this recorder up under the couch. And it's really interesting. You can hear the conversation. This conversation is available. And what they're trying to do is to get him to turn, because they knew what had happened between he and Elijah, to turn publicly against Elijah Muhammad, and to turn more publicly and expose certain things. And Malcolm clearly on this recording said, no, I'm not your boy. I'm not the one. You're not going to get me and use me against another person like that, particularly another African American, another black man. And he refused to do it. And they were just going back and forth, little offers of this and offers of that. And he refused to buy into this nonsense. Okay. Yes. Really?
I read the Quran first with the help of a brother because I didn't know how to read.
Okay.
And I read all the biography, which inspired me to try to be like Malcolm. But then, as I got through my 13-year sentence, at the end of it, I read the FBI file on Malcolm X.
Okay.
Which a lot of the stuff you can see was coming out.
Yeah.
But really put my question is the FBI. And a lot of people say the Nation of Islam killed Malcolm, but I believe the CIA and the FBI.
You're getting ahead of it. We're gonna go right there. Just give me a minute. We're gonna go there. Hold up. Okay. Any other comments at this point? Okay. Yes. Sure. Yeah. See, what folks have to understand, the director of the FBI, the first director, and all the way up into the 70s, from the 1920s to the 70s, was a person named J. Edgar Hoover. He was one of the most racist people that has ever been in law enforcement in the United States. And even before this operation that he put together called COINTELPRO, which was designed to disrupt and to spy on and all of these things, African American social change groups, they were spying on everybody. I mean, NAACP, it didn't matter. But one of the things that was stated in this COINTELPRO documents, that they didn't want to see the rise of a black messiah. And so some of the language that was being used in documents that have come from this is that if Malcolm had not been martyred when he was, that he would have been that person. They recognized the potential that they had in him, but just like I wouldn't allow my brother to get too far in talking about the FBI involvement in the assassination, because it's clear, it's very clear, and I want to bring out a number of people who were and groups who were involved in this assassination process, and the FBI just being one of them. Right. To establish a black nation, yeah, in these southern states. Yes. Well, he was. I don't think he definitely could not have believed that he was actually receiving revelation and this kind of thing. I don't see any kind of way where that could possibly happen. I don't think he believed it. You have to understand that in the 1930s and the 1920s, there were a number of characters in the African American community. Some of them used Islam, some of them used Christianity. In New York City, in Jersey, you had a guy calling himself Daddy Grace. His last name was Grace, and he called himself Sweet Daddy Grace. And Sweet Daddy Grace was actually saying that he was God himself. You had another guy, I think his actual last name was Divine, and he claimed to have been some kind of prophet, and his father was called Father Divine. And they were making this appearance before the Depression and then after the Depression. And so people desperate, coming from out of the Deep South and areas like that with little education and little, comprehension, using their brain, period, went for a lot of this stuff. On the Muslim side, you had someone from North Carolina by the name of Timothy Drew, who established a group before the Nation of Islam called the Moorish Science Temple of America. He claimed to have been a prophet as well. And the Moorish scientist, Drew Ali, and he calls himself Noble Drew Ali, put together what he called his own Quran, a Circle 7 Quran, which, and please, if any of y'all are associated or have family members, don't bum rush me and beat me up when I say this, but when you read it, it's nonsensical. It makes absolutely no sense. Then you have the Nation coming along with this mysterious character, Fard Muhammad, and then the Nation of Islam. So during this period in American history, and particularly in the African American community, there were people who were rising up. The Nation became the most known and probably the best organized. And I submit it was because of the efforts. They had an extraordinary person for 12 years by the name of Malcolm X. They had him on the street. If Drew Ali or if Allah's qadr was that, Drew Ali or anybody, if they had had Malcolm with the commitment that he had, we would be standing here talking about Drew Ali, as opposed to talking the way that we are about Elijah Muhammad. He built the group. He expanded its membership. He started their paper, the Final Call, the paramilitary wing of their group, the Fruit of Islam. Malcolm started the Fruit of Islam. When you go back and trace the infrastructure of the Nation, most of it, if not all of it, goes right back to Malcolm. And so he was just that kind of extraordinary guy that Allah willed that he come through this, through this particular process. But the minute that he really became clear that this is not true Islam, he broke from that. So we have to break to make Salah, and we'll over, and after Salah, I'm not sure. I think we have lunch next. We're at lunch. Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Okay, inshallah, we'll break for Salah and then we'll have lunch right after Salah. And we'll convene at all 3 p.m.
What year, man? What's your name? Okay.
So, brother, this conversion myself, I mean, Muslim life still a child. I'm happy with the other two who
Recording.
fear or I got like share a position with someone to come from same thing, same task, same desire to see the love of this thing. No one